Welcome to this explainer. Imagine, just for a second, that modern physicists and mathematicians finally did it. They mapped the exact geometric structure of human consciousness, and they find this beautiful, incredibly elegant framework. But there's a massive glaring problem. When the dust settles, they realize they've only mapped about 12% of the mind. The other 87%? It's just a massive, unexplained shadow sector. Today, we're diving into how a staggering mathematical breakthrough actually solved this missing percentage. And the craziest part? The answer wasn't found in a modern physics lab. It was found in a 4th century meditative map of the unconscious mind.
Okay, so here is our roadmap through this wildly dense forest of quantum algebra and ancient Buddhism. First, we'll look at the missing shadow sector, then we'll move to the Yogācāra solution, mapping the 8 consciousnesses, karmic seeds and math, and finally, the 3 natures. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The missing shadow sector. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this mystery, we've got to look at something called the visible Hamiltonian. See, researchers had actually successfully mapped out our waking active mind, what Buddhists call the conditioned consciousness, using this 29-channel visible Hamiltonian structure. And honestly, it worked perfectly. But the math dictated that this visible sector only accounted for 12.13% of the total E8 spectrum. That left a staggering 87.87% of the entire mathematical framework completely in the dark. For the longest time, physicists treated it as a decoherence bath, basically just background static or random noise. But let's be real, nature rarely wastes that much space, right? So this missing piece got named the shadow Hamiltonian, or H₂₁₁. It's an invisible 211-dimensional mathematical complement to our conscious mind. Because, trying to casually understand 211-dimensional physics on a Tuesday just isn't hard enough. But seriously, the math absolutely proved that this massive hidden sector was there, and that it was fundamentally linked to our waking mind. The problem was, researchers had absolutely zero idea what it actually looked like from the inside. Which brings us to part 2, the Yogācāra solution. It really helps to think of the mind like a giant iceberg. The earlier mathematical models matched up perfectly with the Theravada Abhidhamma, which is this brilliant Buddhist framework that catalogs the visible, moment-to-moment surface level of our active mind. The 12% tip of the iceberg. But to explain the 87% that is completely underwater, researchers had to look to the Yogācāra school of Mahāyāna Buddhism. Between the 4th and 7th centuries, these ancient practitioners used incredibly advanced meditative states to map out the deepest layers of the unconscious mind. And as we're going to see, what they found wasn't just some loose poetic philosophy. It was precise, it was structural, and it exactly matched the missing math. Section 3. Mapping the 8 consciousnesses. So, Yogācāra philosophy breaks human experience down into 8 distinct consciousnesses. The first 5 are pretty straightforward. There are basic senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. The 6th is our mental consciousness, the part that synthesizes all those senses together. Then, the 7th is the ego fabrication layer. And finally, the 8th. This is a massive, totally submerged storehouse consciousness known as the ālaya-vijñāna. It's the silent, foundational layer that makes up the vast majority of our mental real estate, and it is completely inaccessible to our normal, everyday waking state. Now, what is truly mind-blowing is how a new mathematical theorem, dubbed Theorem Y.I, acts as a literal Rosetta Stone. It completely translates every single level of ancient Buddhist consciousness directly into an E8 algebraic structure. The 5 senses perfectly map to the spectral blocks of the visible Hamiltonian. The synthesizing mind maps to the 18-dimensional observer layer. The ego maps to a boundary operator. And that massive, hidden 8th storehouse consciousness, it maps absolutely flawlessly to the H₂₁₁ shadow Hamiltonian. That is the missing 87% we were just talking about. Let's zoom in on that 7th consciousness for a second, the manas, or the ego. In Yogācāra, this is the layer of the mind that looks back at that massive unconscious storehouse, gets totally confused, and mistakenly grasps it as a permanent self or an I. Mathematically speaking, this correlates exactly to the G2 automorphism group. That is a boundary where the observer mistakenly grasps a geometric projection as the totality of reality. So the math literally shows a geometric boundary where the illusion of a separated self is being fabricated. Wild, right? Section 4. Karmic seeds and math. This naturally brings us to a concept called bīja, which translates to karmic seeds. Yogācāra teaches that literally every single action you take deposits an invisible seed into your unconscious storehouse. And these seeds, they just lie there, totally dormant. They accumulate without showing any immediate visible manifestation in your daily life, just waiting silently until the exact right conditions cause them to ripen and spring back into your conscious reality. It's a system of asymmetrical causation. The seed causes the event, but the event itself cannot directly see the seed.
And this dynamic brilliantly illustrates our next breakthrough, Theorem Y.I. Over in the math of the shadow sector, we have these fascinating things called sedenic zero divisors. Basically, these are elements where you have two totally non-zero entities, let's say X and Y, but when they interact, their visible product is exactly zero. They possess energy, they very much exist, but mathematically, they leave literally zero visible trace until the conditions change. So those karmic seeds described by monks over 1,000 years ago, mathematically speaking, they are sedenic zero divisors.
To actually measure this phenomenon, physicists use a formula called a norm deficit. What this equation is really doing is measuring the latency of these zero divisors over time. The larger the deficit, the more dormant the seed is. In Yogācāra, this perfectly mirrors a concept called vasana, or perfueling. It represents the ongoing, constant conditioning of your unconscious mind by your habitual, everyday actions. Your daily habits are literally, mathematically, perfuming the invisible 87% of your mind.
Section 5. The Three Natures.
So how does this all scale up to define reality itself? That brings us to Theorem Y.I, which deals with the three natures of reality in Mahāyāna philosophy. Step 1 is the imagined nature. This is the delusion where we think things exist entirely on their own, independently. This maps directly to the isolated, conditioned spectral modes in the math. Step 2 is the dependent nature, the realization that everything arises dependently upon everything else. This maps perfectly to the E8 field theory itself. And step 3 is the perfected nature, or ultimate reality. This maps flawlessly to the mathematical kernel, the zero eigenvalue mode, which represents the unconditioned ground of literally all existence. Now please pay attention to this, because it's probably the most staggering realization of the entire framework. All of these mappings, the 8 consciousnesses, the ego boundary, the karmic seeds, the 3 natures of reality, every single one of them works with 0 free parameters. Now, in physics, a free parameter is basically a cheat code. It's a variable you can tweak to force your math to fit your theory. This framework doesn't have any. You can't tweak it. It is an exact, unforced, mathematically rigorous lock. We're not talking about a loose poetic analogy here. This is an exact structural proof. And finally, our conclusion. The source paper we've been walking through leaves us with this absolutely incredible summary. Quote, "Every Yogācāra technical term finds its exact mathematical home in structures already established in the prior literature. I really want you to stop and think about the weight of that. A 4th century phenomenological map of the unconscious mind, created purely through rigorous internal meditation, perfectly and exactly predicted the behavior, the structure, and the dynamics of 211-dimensional quantum algebra." Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought to process. After looking at the sheer, undeniable perfection of this alignment, we have to ask ourselves, is mathematics finally discovering the true nature of the mind? Or is the mind simply revealing the fundamental nature of mathematics? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the reality around you.